You know, I don't watch nearly enough movies. It's a byproduct of being ADHD as f*** that I have a hard time sitting down and letting a story play out in front of me without doing something with my hands. Even when I'm binging a really good series, I have to be playing something that doesn't demand your attention on my second monitor. But despite not necessarily being much of a cinephile, I would say one of my favorite movies, and definitely my favorite cult classic movie, would be the 1979 slice of Americana, The Warriors. Now, this movie was before my time, way before my time, to the tune of about 17 years, give or take, but I think it's great. It's a tightly paced 90 minutes of action, drama, and suspense. It's stylish, a bit goofy, and has a level of grittiness that you don't really get these days with modern Hollywood, now that everything is so rampantly CGI-ified. It's neo-noir action at its finest, but I also would have never even become aware of this movie had it not been for the tie-in game of the same name. You see, tie-in games are nothing new. You don't need me to tell you that. Tie-in games have existed pretty much as long as video games have existed, but they're usually released concurrently with the products that they're adapting in order to get a few extra bucks from it, and as a result, there's been a tradition of these adaptations being rushed, artless crap. But given the fact that the game you're seeing right in front of you is not a shovelware Atari 2600 game, it should come as no shock that the Warriors video game tie-in came no less than 26 years after the movie. Which was honestly kind of unheard of at the time because it sort of went against the philosophy of tie-in games altogether of capitalizing when the iron is hot. And after 26 years, nostalgia aside, the movie couldn't really have been any more out of relevance, short of being a video game adaptation for the movie Stagecoach. Oh wait, does Red Dead Revolver count? A relevant game to bring up because of the developer. You see, if you're gonna have a big budget adaptation of a decades-old movie, then it has to be purely for the passion and love for the movie, and passion and love aren't the type of things that make money. So for a publisher to greenlight a project like this, it would have to be from a relatively bulletproof developer who reliably prints money. Step right up Rockstar Games, specifically Rockstar Toronto. Fun fact, by the way, believe it or not, Rockstar Toronto was actually acquired by Take-Two Interactive before even Rockstar North was. Rockstar Toronto, for those of you who don't know, was formerly known as Imagixel, it's one or the other, and Alternative Reality Technologies, whose best known previous title before their acquisition were the Quarantine games. And if you need an indication on what Quarantine is, it's essentially the spiritual predecessor of Grand Theft Auto, Twisted Metal, and Crazy Taxi. So they had a good pedigree, a proven developer behind the project, and an intellectual property that seemed ripe for the adaptation in that it's action-heavy and stylish. And the result is potentially the greatest movie tie-in game to ever exist, to the point where it kind of transcends the concept. It kind of brings up the question of what it means to be a movie tie-in game. Does it have to come out concurrently to be considered a tie-in game? And more to the point, does it necessarily have to be about the movie to be considered a tie-in game, or can it just be set in the same universe while being its own thing? I guess there's no good answer to that. The second half of the question is relevant in this case because while the game eventually adapts the plot of the film, it doesn't start there. Which makes sense, even if you were to adapt every single action scene into its own individual level, you're probably looking at a 4 to 5 hour game including padding. So instead of that, they start out by showing a pre-rendered cutscene of the opening of the film, so it looks like you're watching a movie on your parents' TV that they just bought, and as such it has like 12 different filters that mess with the visuals. But then they flash back to 3 months before the events of the film, specifically during the induction of Rembrandt, the resident tagger of the Warriors. It makes sense that he's the basis of the tutorial, as even and especially in the movie, he comes across like the baby of the group. An artist who can clearly handle himself in a fight, but who's also the least jaded out of everyone.
Hey, wait for me!
And everything between that and the events of the film is more or less just the day-to-day operations of the Warriors as they're establishing their turf, dealing with rival gangs, and just causing a bunch of chaos in the local area. Now, I also read the plot synopsis for the book that the movie is based on, and it also starts where the movie starts, so this entire prequel portion is original. It's largely centered around a turf war between the Warriors and the Destroyers. In particular, the leader of the Destroyers, Virgil, and for the record, there's also a gang called the Hurricanes, and I would have loved for Virgil to be leading the Hurricanes, because then I could have made the joke about how he is the storm that is approaching. The Destroyers are mostly the main antagonist for this part of the game, and since they don't appear in the movie, you can be sure that they're not going to make it. And it's funny, because something I wasn't even aware of until working on this video, this game also features 5 flashback missions, which tells you the tale of how the Warriors came to be. I always just assumed these flashback missions were just how you replay the missions you already did, but no, these are fully original and have the exact same amount of detail as the regular missions. It turns out the Warriors were actually an offshoot of the Destroyers that broke off when Virgil became corrupted by booze and cocaine. Cleon, the eventual leader of the Warriors, was even the lieutenant of Virgil. Then Cleon and Vermin were then betrayed by Virgil. They were given fake drugs to sell to Satan's mothers, that's the name of the gang, with the understanding that the fake drugs would be sussed out and the 2 of them would be killed in the crossfire. Only they survive and decide to start a new gang. A clinically insane leader of a faction of people deciding to betray what are ostensibly his own allies for a literally no good reason? That's relevant. Elbows up. That's the most major part of the backstory. The rest of the flashback missions merely tell you the stories of how the other members were recruited. Specifically, the other 6 people other than Rembrandt who were at the meeting in the movie. The first of these flashback missions take place just shy of a year before the game starts, meaning the Warriors only existed for about 15 months by the time the movie started. I'm not sure if that's canon to the movie or the book, but I don't see why it couldn't be. It eventually got to the point where the Warriors and the Destroyers would both rule different parts of Coney Island, and it's only once Virgil and his boys get aggressive and even murder one of the Warriors that nothing short of full-tilt destruction of the Destroyers would suffice. And while it easily could have been, that's not the entire plot of this chunk of the game. You also have a few run-ins with the aforementioned Hurricanes when one of their lieutenants get out of jail but refuse to pay the money that he owes the Warriors.
Because I'm about to rock you like a hurricane.
Fucking right, man.
Then you also have to deal with this group called the Orphans, who claim to have beaten up the Warriors in a rumble. There's a blackout and subsequent riot at one point, and of course, you and a whole bunch of other gangs decide to indulge in some less than wholesome activities. There's one level where you have to sabotage some corrupt cops working with an enemy gang, and the final mission before you get into the events of the movie is a mission where you have to tag a bunch of brand new subway cars with the Warriors logo in order to make your gang known citywide. The best way to describe this part of the game would be like the episodic TV show leading into the movie, largely based around self-contained adventure of the week plots with a few overarching plot threads. Other than the Destroyers who end up getting snuffed out like 5 levels before the events of the movie take place, the primary subplot running through this part of the game is about getting enough of a reputation to get on the Gramercy Rift's radar, because they're the ones who are organizing a giant meet between all the noteworthy gangs of New York. So everything you do inadvertently gradually catches their attention until a gang that's already noteworthy enough to have been invited puts in a good word for you. From there, the game is basically just a shot-for-shot remake of a lot of the various scenes in the movie, to the point where in some of these cases you can practically do a side-by-side comparison. Cyrus, the leader of the Rifts, is shot by the leader of the Rogues gang, Luther. The Warriors are blamed, Cleon is killed, and the rest of the gang has to make it back to their home turf, with Swan as the de facto leader and main character. What this game essentially does is it cuts between major story segments and puts entire levels between scenes in the movie. Like, for example, in the part of the movie immediately after the meeting in the movie, the Warriors just need to book it for the subway station while being chased by a bus full of angry Turnbull ACs. And this does happen, but between these 2 chunks of the story, they have an entire level based around having to make your way through a linear series of areas trying to regroup with your gang members who got separated. Then you make a run for it. This is obviously a necessary inclusion as well, given that the action scenes, while fairly frequent for a 90-minute movie, are definitely not enough for a game. And this pattern repeats itself throughout the rest of the game to varying degrees of success. Some of it makes sense, like the fight in the park with the baseball furies, and some of it comes across as a slight bit desperate, like the level with the Lizzies called Friendly Faces, where you have to break out of their apartment while getting shot at, and it takes something like 16 seconds, assuming you don't immediately get shot dead. Aside from expanding on various aspects of the plot of the film, there are also a few aspects that get changed around a bit. There are a couple of segments that were completely cut on the grounds of having no action, therefore no potential for gameplay. In particular, most of the scenes with Mercy, the prostitute girlfriend of one of the orphans who then becomes the love interest to Swan. A romance I never found particularly compelling, but the fact that most of her scenes are cut here ends up kind of meaning that she just exists a lot of the time. Now, it does speak to the movie's length that even shoehorning in a level everywhere they can, you only get 5 full levels, and one of them is just a short segment of gameplay followed by the final boss. But it all ends in the same way. You confront Luther on the shores of Coney Island. Incidentally, as far as the "Warriors come out to play" scene is, I cannot watch it anymore. I know it's a deliberately obnoxious scene, but my god, hearing Luther do his thing is like nails on a chalkboard. Especially after watching it for like the 5th time.
Warriors, come out to play!
Shut the fuck up! Do you know what shut the fuck up mean?
But in the end, you throw a knife straight into his arm as he's trying to shoot you, then the Riffs show up after finding out that Luther was the one who killed Cyrus, and the Warriors let the Riffs do their thing. The end. You know, it's kind of funny looking at that ending because you know for a fact that Swan was not a universally beloved figure in the Warriors in the same way that Cleon was. So I wonder if there's going to be a power struggle and eventual splintering of the gang. Something similar actually happened to a gang that operated out of the neighborhood I grew up in. This gang was always just hanging around the neighborhood, but then they disappeared one day without a trace. I didn't know what happened for years until I talked to a buddy of mine in my high school's Last Chance program who was tangentially involved in some way. Turns out the leader of the gang went off the deep end one day and decided to assault a bunch of people on the bus. He got arrested, then the gang splintered and fell apart. I think there was a small-time outfit that sort of replaced them, but from what I understand, it was just a bunch of glorified weed dealers operating out of a local high school who decided to give themselves a gang name. But really, they were just a bunch of scrawny kids who couldn't whip cream with an outboard motor. Personal anecdotes aside, what is there to say other than, if you like the Warriors, you'll like the plot of this game because it's essentially the same plot of the film with extra bits. Which will also appeal to you if you like the characters and want to get more of them. You know how these days Hollywood has a tendency of making prequel films to Hollywood classics that nobody asked for? This is essentially that, except I'm glad this one exists. Because on one hand I like these characters and want to see the origin story of how the gang came to be, but also between the flashback missions and the main game, the Destroyers subplot almost comes across as though it's the real main plot, while the actual main plot comes across as more of an obligation. Kind of reminds me of the tie-in game to X-Men Origins Wolverine, because if you recall when I covered that game, I made the observation that the Sentinel subplot that takes up a good chunk of the game almost comes across like it was the game they wanted to make, while the plot of the movie felt like an obligation, and I don't believe they intentionally did this here, but because they had to follow a script for the main chunk of the plot, the part they made themselves felt much more fleshed out because it wasn't limited by a pre-existing story, therefore they could make it as fleshed out as they wanted. But either way, it's satisfying to watch the Destroyers mess with you and then gradually get theirs, and it's also satisfying to watch Luther eventually get his, so what's not to like? Well, really, there's nothing to dislike about this game, story or otherwise, and that's mostly because it feels like the Warriors kind of came pre-packaged with its own unique gameplay setup. This is a very interesting game if nothing else, in that it almost comes across like an amalgam of several different games that Rockstar Games had made around this time. The most obvious one, of course, being Bully, given the fact that they share a very similar combat engine, but then again, it also plays a lot like Manhunt in that it's a linear level-based game that includes stealth elements as well as brutally beating the hell out of people with all manner of blunt objects, and it also has a similar, if more fleshed-out gang control mechanic to GTA San Andreas where you can command your posse to do one of several different things. Plus, it also has no shortage of mechanics that are its own thing and aren't necessarily taken from any game that Rockstar Games had previously made. The best way to describe the general tone of gameplay would be a bar fight simulator. It's one of those cases where you're often in the middle of large gang versus gang skirmishes, and the lack of cohesion of the fights makes it come across like you're a bunch of drunken barflies smashing each other over the head with bottles or just throwing each other into each other. Like I said, the combat is somewhat reminiscent of the combat in Bully, which I suppose makes sense given that they're both games made by Canadian subsidiaries of Rockstar Games. The Warriors came out first though. The majority of the fighting mechanics are introduced in the very first level as Rembrandt, starting off simple, just introducing light attack and heavy attack combos, grapples and takedown moves, weapon combat, group combat. special strong attacks, as well as your rage meter. The rage meter is a special mechanic wherein if you do enough damage over a short enough period of time, you'll be able to activate rage mode, at which point your attacks will do increased damage, and your strong attacks as well as your strong grapple attacks will not only be way stronger, but will also have entirely different animations, and it's a combat engine that works. You can just stand there doing combos on whoever is nearest to you, but it's genuinely fun to experiment with the combat engine, using weapons and grapples, doing a running attack where you basically do a flying crossbody on everyone. Note, don't try and clear gaps with this attack, it doesn't work. The weapons are especially fun to use. Much like Manhunt, the environment will have a lot of different objects for you to pick up and play around with. A lot of which are bricks and beer bottles, but a lot of different environments have unique weapons as well, like band equipment or billiards equipment. While a lot of it is functionally similar, swung one blunt object, swung them all, damned if there isn't a novelty of just grabbing something off the wall and beating someone into submission with it. Despite their frequency, the beer bottles and bricks are among some of my favorites for the fact that they can be thrown, but you can also get up close to someone and smash them over the head with it, which has a unique animation. You can even then use a broken beer bottle as a stabbing weapon. The fun thing about the weapons is that most of them are weapons also featured in the movie, like Molotov cocktails or a broken pipe. It goes a ways to make this game feel very tonally similar to the movie, although there are a few things that are a bit peculiar in this case. In the movie, it was a big deal when one of the characters had a gun, and one of the major set pieces was built around using a Molotov cocktail. But here they also have things going up to and including knives and machetes, when I always interpreted the action in this sort of thing to be goofy but non-lethal. Like, to my memory, the only people who definitively died outside of the opening scene in the movie died by complete accident. Meanwhile, you can just straight up kill people in this game without a hint of remorse. So I would say Rockstar Games is putting their own artistic license into the game. But still, the sheer variety and versatility of the weapons combat makes it worth it to play around with. And honestly, who hasn't thought about smashing someone over the head with a baseball bat or a toilet plunger or a broom or whatever else comes up? Then there's the Rage mode, which takes enough time and skill to build up that it's just plain fun to annihilate everyone in your wake once it's activated. The various button combinations to do various attacks stay the same from character to character, but every different character has a different set of attack animations relevant to their fighting style. Like how the standard version of Rembrandt's strong grapple has him spray his opponents in the face with spray paint, which is in line with something he does in the movie, and while it's usually not as obvious as that, every character's attack style is somewhat based on their movie counterpart. Yeah, this is one thing that may surprise you playing the game sight unseen, because I was expecting more or less to play through the entire game as Rembrandt. But in virtually every level, you play as a different character of the 9 core members. There are some minor differences, like the specific amount of health you have, or the type of strong grapple you have. Personally, my favorite is probably Ajax, because he has this one strong grapple in Rage mode where he basically suplexes you. Never get tired of that sort of thing. But either way, the combat largely feels the same regardless of which character you're using, and that's good because the combat is great. There's a real heaviness to the way the strikes land in the combat engine, especially with the special moves. It would only be more visceral if it had X-ray moves like Mortal Kombat, where you get to see the bones crushing and breaking under the weight of your fist. And it doesn't go over the top with it either. It's hard to put a pin on exactly why the melee engine feels so good. As usual, I think it comes down to all the little details. The way the blows connect, the way the sound effects play, the way a realistic amount of blood splatters, the way everything breaks around you. It makes everything feel reactive and legitimate, which lends to every blow in the game feeling very stimulating. You're probably looking at this combat and thinking that it doesn't look smooth at all, and yeah, it's not smooth. I think that kind of adds to the scrappy nature of the fights. You're not professional fighters, you're just a bunch of glorified barflies throwing your weight around. But yeah, the animations don't really flow into each other, which may make the action seem a bit disjointed, which is the biggest knock you can give against this game, but to that I say, don't assume just because it looks a bit clunky that it's not fun. Sure, the gameplay looks a bit less smooth than, say, your average Yakuza game, but the combat still packs a wallop, and that's the most important thing. Like I said before, the worst type of combat is the type of combat where two character models are just swinging at each other, and there may be visual effects, but there's no real indication that they're connecting. Whereas the best type of combat engine is the type where the blows land and they feel legitimate. They feel like they're actually colliding with each other. And this game certainly nails the feeling of blows feeling like they're actually connecting. Like skin is actually meeting skin. My only real issue with the combat is the auto lock-on is slightly finicky, like it'll prioritize random people or even your own allies over the character you're actually trying to fight, up to and including bosses. And there is a manual lock-on as well, but you have to fiddle around with the auto lock-on until it locks onto the person you want to lock on to before you press the button to properly lock on. I'm also not a big fan of the blocking, because what is a block if not something preventing you from taking damage while you're trying to close the distance between you and a target? Like, yeah, it works when you're trying to prevent yourself from taking damage from someone right in front of you, but if you're trying to play a bit passively, the moment you block, the person you're trying to close the distance on might immediately get out of range of your strikes, so you have to let your guard down to get closer. Why? Because you can't move when you're blocking. It got to the point where I barely ended up even blocking and just tanked attacks when necessary, which isn't much of an issue because on normal difficulty I only died like once in the game. I mean, I was caught by police on more than one occasion, but as far as just losing all your health, it didn't come up that much. You see, as long as you get some money together and buy yourself some health restoration items, you're pretty much good. The health restoration items, by the way, is something called Flash. It's a drug that restores vitality when you snort it, so 3 guesses what it actually is. Although Flash is a slightly obscure euphemism in drug use. Then again, I downloaded a PDF of all the drug-related words, and it's something like 50 pages long. How you get money is one of the things they introduce in the second level. Long story short, you get money by stealing shit. The most immediately profitable thing is breaking into a store and raiding the joint, stealing all the merchandise, breaking open the cash register, you name it. They even have a specifically designated unlocking minigame for these instances. Although because I'm as steadfast as a mountain, I hacked into the game to get it running at 60 FPS, and I'm pretty sure that makes the unlocking minigame run about twice as fast as it should. But that's the only thing I personally noticed, and it's a small detail anyway. Still perfectly manageable, although it does make certain instances frantic as hell. Eventually you also get around to learning to steal money by stealing car radios as well as mugging people. Funnily enough, you can actually even mug homeless people, which is never not a hilarious sight.
Let's do this the easy way. You bastard!
While it's not necessarily the most elaborate thing to do, damned if there isn't just a primal joy in being able to break stuff and cause chaos. Which, if you ask me, is what a gang simulator should be focusing on, causing as much chaos as humanly possible. And this is the thing that begets the last major aspect of gameplay. This wouldn't be a gang simulator without cops poking around in your business. So causing any sort of major chaos can result in the cops showing up, either through alarms going off or the people snitching on you, but you can give those snitches stitches before they have the chance. And this is what makes the crime aspect innately exciting, because you're sort of living on a razor's edge, trying not to get caught in a lot of cases because the cops are the toughest enemies in the game. They have a buttload of health, they're practically impossible to grapple in a lot of cases, and even then, they're the one enemy in the game that can give you a game over without draining your health if they arrest you. But if you take them out, you can also get keys or cuffs, which allows you to instantly free one of your allies who have been cuffed, or cuff one of your enemies, though I never ended up doing that second one. To me, it comes across as though pretty much every aspect of the moment-to-moment gameplay is tightly designed to work in tandem with each other. You fight, so you need help. To get help, you need money. To get money, you need to do crime. To do crime, you need to deal with the cops. To deal with the cops, you need to fight. It's this beautifully circular design that begets a real tightness to the experience that, good or bad, a lot of Rockstar games tend to lack, where some of the mechanics and even entire gameplay segments feel like individualized parts of gameplay instead of parts of the game that naturally bleed into each other. Which makes for a less varied experience, but also makes it so each individual element of the game stands out all the more. A more tightly focused experience where everything feels refined and consequential overall. And part of the fact that this game is so tightly designed comes down to the fact that uniquely among a lot of Rockstar's catalog, this game is not a sandbox. This is one of the many reasons why, despite having some gameplay similarities to Bully, I consider them very different games, because I can't call two games similar if they're not even in the same genre. Though it's not fully linear. You see, between levels, you have a hub in which you can access the different levels that you have available to you, or you can go outside into the hub and play around. This is sort of a pseudo sandbox, but there's really only a few city blocks, and there's not much for you to do other than practice the various activities you're going to be doing during the main game. There's a couple of stores for you to trash, one for you to rob, a couple of cars to break into, plenty of people for you to bug. But ultimately, none of it is for any benefit because you don't carry over any of the money you earn or the items you carry into the levels, so it's mostly just done for its own sake with the exception of a few things. Throughout the story, you can do some exercises to upgrade your stamina, which I believe means grapple stamina, as in how long and how frequently you can grab someone. And you also have the ability to do various tasks for people all over Coney to give you various perks. Some of them are more useful than others, but it's worth it to do all of them if for no other reason than every bit helps. This one tripped me out when I played this game as a teenager because you have to feed a couple of hobos, but while most of the items were relatively easy to find, I could never find the donuts. Turns out the donut is in the ice cream shop, which means I had spent several attempts back in the day looking for something I could easily find because I didn't think to go to the same vendor twice. The most useful upgrade would be the 4th flash slot, say that 5 times fast, because it gives you another healing item which is always useful, the more the better. Then the other most useful upgrades don't become available until the story's almost over, such as the separate strength upgrades for both punches and kicks. Then you have the self-uncuff, which doesn't become available until the game's already over. Though this certainly helped me out because I had inadvertently left the flashback missions until after the story end because I didn't realize that they were extra levels as I said. So I had every advantage going into those. Didn't stop me from being arrested at one point, but whoop-de-doo. But yeah, aside from these character building activities, momentary practice for the main game, as well as the novelty of wandering around the hub for a few minutes, there's really not much to occupy you in the main hub. I found the most interesting thing to do in the hub was to try and take on the entire clubhouse. If you beat up one person, the entire clubhouse will come after you.
Show what we got, alright?
It's a fun challenge to see how long you can last, though I'm not entirely convinced that it's not impossible to actually survive against the entire gang. But yeah, other than that, the hub's really not that interesting. Which is fair enough, because the linear missions are the things you're here for anyway. And it's not to say these levels are completely linear either. Some of them are, but some of them are more like small sandbox maps in themselves, wherein you have to go around doing one thing or another. If it's a sandbox map, chances are you need to collect money for something, and more often than not, these levels are split into multi-part missions as well, so you need to go through multiple environments in a single mission depending on what's going on. But I would say a majority of these levels are fairly linear, but that's fine. It once again lends this game its tightness of design. And I would say all these levels have something at least somewhat memorable about them. Like, there's this one level where you're being chased by a gang called the Hi-Hats, and then you find yourself in the leader's art studio and you have to trash the place. It's like the Smash It Up mission from Bully, and I'm always happy to have a reason to smash up the place. Then there's the mission Real Heavy Rep, where you have to defend your honor against the orphans, and you basically find yourself battling wave after wave of these 2-bit gang members, and as a matter of fact, there's even a side mission in this mission, which is just taking out 40 orphans. Which is one of those sentences that doesn't make sense, or doesn't sound very wholesome in any other context. Yeah, side missions are a thing here. I don't know what their purpose is other than 100% completion, but this is one of those cases where if the game tells me to beat up 40 people, I'm happy to oblige. Matter of fact, one of my favorite side missions was from the flashback mission Heavy Muscle, where Ajax and Snow get their colors stolen when they wander into enemy territory, and once you get your colors back, you have to escape back to Warriors territory, and then you get chased by what I think is an infinite wave of destroyers, and you have the option to run away, but the side quest in this area is to take out 10 destroyers on your way back. I was happy to, but it turns out you get swarmed by so many people it actually crashed my emulator. I wouldn't have minded, but I was right at the end of the mission, and you have to do all the flashback quests to unlock this game mode called Armies of the Night, which is this spoof Streets of Rage game mode, which I suppose is Rockstar paying homage to the Pioneer beat-em-ups that inspired the game. It's not that I'm particularly enamored by this game mode, because I'm not super fond of 2D beat-em-ups. I don't hate them, they've just never really clicked with me in the way other genres have. I just wanted to unlock it for the sake of showing it off, just in case there was something interesting to say. Turns out there really wasn't. Thankfully, as with most Rockstar games, this game has a healthy selection of cheat codes, and one of them is to automatically beat the level for you. Thank Jeebus for that. Then there's also the mission Paying the Cost, which is a mission largely in the main Coney Island map, but there's a frantic nature to this mission that I find quite appealing, as the main part of the mission has you going from business to business, defending them from incoming destroyers who are trying to upheave your protection racket you have running. Then there's the mission Boys in Blue. This is a relatively open mission, but one with a very organic feel to it, because this is a mission where the cops have instituted a gang curfew on account of a cop being killed. But a couple of your boys were scouting there, so you need to collect them before they get bopped by the cops. The most significant chunk of this mission is having to collect a bunch of money to pay one of the Gramercy Rifts to let you know where your boys are. So you need to mug and steal all you can in a situation where the cops are clamping down like mad. It's funny, this game has stealth mechanics. It's one of the things that it takes from Manhunt, if you ask me. This is an instance where I feel like the game encourages stealth in a more organic way, but the game also has some rather haphazard stealth segments where you're encouraged to distract scouts and take them out from behind, but it's pretty vapid as stealth mechanics go. And it's a lot easier and, quite frankly, a lot more fun to simply beat them up anyway. Meanwhile, I like missions like this where the stealth is encouraged insofar as you have to jump from shadow to shadow in the midst of an intense situation, and this is probably the best level for that. So like I said, pretty much every level has something to talk about. I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say that every level is completely unique. There's no doubt that certain concepts get reused, especially towards the end of the game when we get into the movie portion, largely because a lot of the ideas from the pre-movie portion of the game were adapted from scenes in the movie. So the inspiration shows up after the thing that uses the inspiration. Like that one set piece where you have to mash buttons to run for your life, or where you have to simply run in a fixed direction. Yeah, definitely inspired by movie scenes, but similar concepts were used beforehand. I will say though, the absolute worst level in the game is the level All City, which is the final level before the meeting. This is the aforementioned level where you have to spray paint on a bunch of new subway cars in order to make the warrior's name known all over the city. I'm already not a fan of the spray painting minigame. All you really do is trace a W either once or multiple times, and it's mindless, and despite only taking like 10 seconds, it still feels like it goes on for way too long, especially if you happen to be running low on spray paint. Matter of fact, this is one of the primary side missions throughout the game, and I never did it, not even once. It doesn't help that to do these tags you have to collect spray paint cans which cost money, and you may need that money for more valuable things like weapons or flash. And even finding the people who can sell you the spray paint or finding the tags can be a pain in the ass in itself. So it's one of those things I never really did outside of mandatory objectives, and at least in mandatory objectives, they let you know where the tags are. Like in this one early level, or there was this entire chunk of a mission early into the game based around a graffiti competition where you have to quickly go around and grab whatever spray paint came up and then be the first to finish your gang's tag. That specific part of that mission is a bit obnoxious, but it's tolerable because most gangs are occupied doing their own thing and you don't generally get attacked in the middle of graffitiing.
What an odd thing to say.
Plus, the rest of the mission is pretty fun, but in that mission All City, you have to tag, or bomb as they call it, 7 brand new trains. Simple enough, that's really the only thing you need to do. But the problem is, this mission is swarming with cops and moonrunners. So I'm not kidding when I say it will be minutes between properly tagging any of these subway trains, because between practically every tag, you have swarms and swarms of cops and moonrunners that will just maul you. And invariably, there will always be another wave showing up just as you finished the previous wave, and even if you do manage to find time to tag a single car, or even partially tag it because you have to tag 3 separate points on each car, there's a 50-50 chance that you'll get interrupted. It's a nightmare. And sure, you can just run away and hide in the shadows until the heat dies off, but for one thing, the heat takes forever to die off. And for another thing, even if you become anonymous, you only need one person to spot you to have another swarm of people on top of you. Like sure, you can deliberately sneak around and try and take out the scouts before they see you, but one, that always takes way too long, especially in the open environments like this. And 2, there are a lot of scouts, and so there are a lot of opportunities for you to get caught. It's honestly just quicker to fight your way through it, and this mission gives you a butt-ton of free flash. So this mission wasn't even that hard, it just took forever. But that's the worst of it. There are a few other levels I'm not too fond of, and generally speaking, all the levels I don't like suffer from the same things: a slowness of pace. Like, one of the later levels has it to where a bunch of the warriors are indisposed for various reasons. A couple are arrested, a couple are hiding, and a couple are knocked out. Unfortunately, the ones that are knocked out need to be revived with Flash, meaning you need money or you need to find Flash. And this is one of those levels where it's obnoxious as hell to try and find money because there are no shop fronts that I could find and there are no pedestrians from what I could find. Then the only people you can mug were gang members, but that could only work if you knock out all the gang members except for one and then mugged the last guy because the muggings can be interrupted. Or you can just knock them out, which will give you less money. Plus, this is another level that's swarming with cops, so it's very easy to find yourself having your muggings be interrupted by cops as well. So even if you knock out all the gang members, it's not a guarantee. I mean, it's not bad, it just really needed an easier way to collect money. Although I was watching the Season 3 finale of Invincible on the other monitor while I was playing this level, and let me tell you, if there's anything that could get you more pumped than watching the Conquest fight, I would like to see it. Though to be clear, while these are the worst missions in the game, there are instances where the mission is good overall, but has one chunk so apocalyptically bad that it makes me want to throw my controller. The part that immediately comes to mind would be the Virgil boss fight. The thing is, there are a lot of good boss fights in this game. A particular highlight for me would be the boss fight with Chatterbox, the leader of the Hi-Hats gang. You have to fight him in this carnival ride. It starts out with you having to throw stuff and lure him out, which then results in a fairly difficult boss fight where you still have to prioritize ranged combat over melee combat because he hits like a brick shithouse. But what's fun about this particular boss fight is that there's a roller coaster that cuts right through this room, and getting hit by it is an instant kill. I wanted to see if it was also an insta-kill for Chatterbox, so I lured him onto the track and grappled him. Grappling a boss gets automatically countered, but he was locked into the counter animation for just long enough that by the time the animation ended, he couldn't get out of the way of the car, and yes, it was an insta-kill. That was pretty glorious. Then there's this boss fight with a couple of the enforcers for the Hurricanes. These absolute mountains of men who hit like a ton of bricks. A true challenge to overcome. There's this fairly unique boss fight with the leader of the Turnbull ACs who's in a wheelchair, and you have to use ranged attacks and gang commands to lure him back and forth into vulnerable areas. That's pretty creative. And then my favorite boss fight would be from one of the flashback missions, specifically the final flashback mission where you're playing as Cochise trying to join the gang. And it results in a boss fight with this big motherfucker who's part of the Harlem-based gang called the Boppers. Which is strange because I assumed Bopper was just a generic term for all the gang members in this universe. Regardless, the whole point of this boss fight is to get his hat, so you have to fight him and then knock his hat off, at which point you'll do a dance routine in the middle of the fight. To quote Yahtzee Croshaw, that is so fucking goofy, Disney just filed a restraining order. Also, I gotta admit, this guy really reminds me of Big Smoke.
You the punk that's been looking for Big Mo?
Same things make us laugh, make us cry.
But as far as terrible boss fights, step right up Virgil Part 2. Virgil Part 1 and 3 are fine. The first one is just you throwing stuff at him from a distance. Part 3 is a relatively standard fight, but Part 2 is such a pain in the ass, it's kind of amazing. Possibly up there as being one of the most obnoxious boss fight segments of the era, if not ever. In this part of the boss fight, Virgil is constantly hiding in the shadows and you have to look for him, and if you go anywhere near him, he will immediately, and I mean immediately, kick you in the nuts. Then he'll run away before you have a chance to respond. There's no way to counter him. You might be able to get a single punch off before getting your eggs scrambled. And the whole fight takes place in this really tight arena where you can barely see what's going on to begin with. It's a nightmare. I actually restarted this boss fight because I was convinced I was doing something wrong, but no, this is just functioning as intended. Don't know what they were thinking there. I found the easiest way to do this was to get as close as possible and do a strong melee attack or just throw stuff at him. Yeah, if I never have to do this boss fight again, it will be too soon. So as usual, there are some parts to the game I'm not too fond of, and I feel like they could have easily done with a design overhaul that made for a more convenient progression, but as with many of my favorite games, despite my issues, it's still a banger of a game. You gotta take the good with the bad sometimes, and this is a game I'm satisfied with by the end. It's funny because in the grand scheme of things, this game literally doesn't do anything new. It borrows a story from a pre-existing intellectual property and expands on it. The gameplay is quite reminiscent of a number of different games I've played, and yet despite being an amalgam of sorts, I find this is a compelling experience that I can come back to again and again. And the craziest thing for me is the fact that this was a movie tie-in game made back when movie tie-in games were a dime a dozen, and yet despite the reputation of movie tie-in games at the time, this transcends so far beyond what these types of games usually offer that it's not only a game that stands on its own without being a fan of the movie, it might be the greatest movie tie-in game ever. Just being a good tie-in game at the time was seen as an impossible feat, and yet this game does the even more impossible feat by being a truly classic game, which also just so happens to be a movie tie-in. And the reason is simple. It wasn't a cynical cash grab like so many other games of its type are. It was made because a talented studio of people wanted to adapt what they clearly had passion for. And it just so happens to have been a movie that was perfect to be made into a game. Even to this day, I feel like this might be the greatest game ever made to directly adapt a movie. Except maybe Toy Story 2. It's a close second at least. Because to go back to my topic from earlier about what constitutes a tie-in game, I feel like it is truly a spectrum. Because the concept of a tie-in is a truly vague concept. So I feel like it all fits in some way, just in their own categories. You have adaptations that tell a story within a larger continuity, like Alien Isolation, and then you have more universe adaptations where you're not necessarily adapting anything with any sort of pre-established characters. More so, you're telling your story within a larger universe, such as Mad Max. A direct adaptation is definitely the hardest to pull off, and The Warriors pulls it off exceptionally. Of course, since this was a standalone movie, there was obviously never any sequels, so there was never a chance at getting a sequel to the game. There was supposed to be a spiritual successor based around the London gang wars of the 1960s, but that never went anywhere. And honestly, this is one of the rare cases where there's not even any need for a remaster, especially, given Rockstar's recent history. Because The Warriors is surprisingly still available on most modern platforms through digital download. I'm surprised the license didn't run out, though I wonder if they have a perpetual license for this particular adaptation. Don't know, couldn't tell you. I don't know how well the digital version of this game runs. Like most games of its type, it's probably just an emulated copy of the PS2 version with upscaled graphics, but hey, that still makes it a perfectly playable game in that case. So go check out the game and check out the movie. Neither are perfect, but they're pretty great. That's all I've got. If you like this video and want to support the channel, you can leave a like, leave a comment telling me what you think, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. And if you want to support the channel in a more direct fashion, you can pledge to my Patreon for unique perks and rewards such as early access, Discord benefits, and exclusive content, along with these fine folks right here. And an extra special thank you to Dick Kickham, Hydra Overlord, FarmCat84, Raph, Ranger X, Sphinx, Weird Webster, and Will Stokes for going above and beyond. Also, while he's no longer part of the Patreon, I do want to say thank you to Gaw004 for, he recently sent me a care package of games in the mail which contained literally over $200 worth of games, USD. Sometimes it is easy to take your fans for granted when you're in my position, but man, that is a punch to the face to remind me that, man, fans really are awesome. So, thank you. Elsewise than that, I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.